truck drivers sleep in minus 30 degrees Celsius every single night. Not occasionally, not in emergencies. Every night, all winter, across Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, and the northern United States. And most of them sleep better than you do. That sounds impossible. A metal box in temperatures that can kill an unprotected person within the hour. No hotel, no insulated walls. Just a curtain, a bunk, and whatever's keeping the cold out. Here's how it actually works, and why the answer is a lot more engineered than you'd expect. Here's something almost nobody outside the trucking industry knows about steel. It conducts heat roughly 400 times faster than wood, which means a truck cab with no heating running doesn't slowly get cold over the course of a night. It gets cold fast. In extreme temperatures, the interior of an unpowered cab can drop to life-threatening levels within 45 minutes of the engine shutting off. Not uncomfortable, life-threatening. And most people, when they hear that, land on the same obvious answer. Just leave the engine running. The engine produces heat. Problem solved. It isn't that simple. In most of the United States and Canada, leaving a diesel engine idling overnight is illegal. Anti-idling laws exist across dozens of states and provinces, introduced to cut emissions in populated areas. The fine for a violation can reach up to $25,000. And even without the legal problem, idling a main diesel engine through a winter night burns between 2 and 4 liters of fuel per hour. For a driver on the road 300 nights a year, that's up to $15,000 spent annually just to stay warm. Every single year, just on overnight heat. So the industry had a genuine problem on its hands, a metal shell that loses heat faster than almost any other material. A law that makes the most obvious solution illegal. And a driver who still needs to sleep 8 hours in temperatures that don't forgive mistakes. What engineers built in response is one of the most underrated pieces of technology on any highway today. And almost nobody who drives past it has any idea it exists. Inside the frame of almost every modern long-haul truck sits a device most people have never heard of. It's roughly the size of a shoebox. It has its own fuel line tapped directly into the main diesel tank, its own ignition system, its own thermostat, and it runs completely independently from the main engine. Brands like Webasto and Espar have been building them for decades, originally for military vehicles and aircraft ground equipment. Today, they're standard on any serious cold-weather truck. It's called a diesel parking heater, and it burns as little as 0.2 liters of fuel per hour. Compare that to 4 liters per hour for an idling main engine. And you start to see why these things exist everywhere once you know to look for them. In Scandinavia, where temperatures regularly drop below minus 20 degrees Celsius for months at a time, parking heaters aren't optional equipment. They come fitted from the factory on Volvo and Scania trucks, because the alternative, idling the main engine all night, is both financially ruinous and, in many areas, flat-out illegal. But the parking heater is the baseline solution, because some trucks carry something more advanced, something that doesn't just heat the cab. It turns it into a completely self-sufficient living space at minus 30 degrees Celsius. It's called an APU, an auxiliary power unit, a second engine mounted to the frame of the truck, running independently from the main drivetrain. It powers the heating, the air conditioning, the refrigerator, the electrical outlets, everything the driver needs to function overnight without touching the main engine once. A good APU burns around 1 liter of diesel per hour, a fraction of the cost of idling, and it pays for itself inside a single winter season. Now here's the question nobody ever asks. What happens when it fails? It's 3 in the morning. You're parked at a rest stop somewhere in northern Minnesota. Outside, it's minus 38 degrees Celsius. The nearest truck stop is 40 miles away. The nearest hotel is unreachable without moving the truck, and moving the truck means losing the parking spot and the hours you've already logged toward your mandatory rest. Then you wake up cold. You check the heater panel. Nothing. The parking heater has stopped. You check the APU. Also dead. The cab temperature is already dropping at roughly 1 degree per minute. In 20 minutes, it will be minus 15 degrees Celsius inside the cab. In an hour, the situation becomes genuinely dangerous. This is not a hypothetical. Every experienced cold weather driver has a version of this story, which is exactly why the preparation doesn't start the night before. It starts weeks before the first freeze hits. The first thing most people never think about is the fuel itself. At around minus 15 degrees Celsius, standard diesel begins to gel. Wax crystals form inside untreated fuel and block the filters and fuel lines completely. The engine shuts down, and so does the parking heater, at exactly the same moment, because they share the same tank. The solution is winter blend diesel or an anti-gel additive poured in before temperatures drop. Every serious cold weather driver carries it. The second is the batteries. Cold cuts battery capacity significantly. At minus 40 degrees Celsius, a standard truck battery can deliver less than 40% of its rated output. A truck running an APU and full cab electronics overnight can need up to 8 batteries, double the standard setup, just to make it through a single night without a system shutdown. The third is something as simple as a curtain. Thermal insulated curtains hung between the cab and the sleeper berth reduce heat loss by up to 60%. They cost around $50. At minus 30 degrees Celsius, they are the difference between the parking heater running for 4 hours or 8. $50. And it doubles your safety window. And the fourth is the bedding. Experienced cold weather drivers don't sleep under a blanket. They use sleeping bags rated to minus 20 degrees Celsius or lower as their primary layer. Even if the heating system partially fails in the night, the bedding buys time. That buffer is the difference between an inconvenience and an emergency call at 3 in the morning from a rest stop with no cell signal. Here's something that surprises almost everyone who hasn't spent time studying this industry. The widespread adoption of parking heaters and APUs across North American trucking wasn't driven by comfort. It wasn't driven by drivers asking for better equipment. It was driven by government regulation. Anti-idling laws started appearing in American cities in the early 2000s, primarily as environmental measures targeting diesel emissions in urban areas. They were never specifically designed for long-haul truckers. But trucking was the industry most immediately affected because truckers were the ones idling diesel engines for 8 hours at a stretch in populated areas overnight. The industry's first reaction was resistance. The second was adaptation. Fleets that had been idling their engines for decades suddenly had a financial and legal incentive to find a better solution. Parking heater manufacturers, which had existed mostly as niche suppliers for military and aerospace applications, found themselves in the middle of a trucking industry that urgently needed exactly what they made. Within 10 years, the auxiliary power unit went from a luxury add-on found on a small percentage of premium trucks to standard equipment expected on any serious long-haul rig. A regulation designed to reduce urban emissions accidentally solved a cold weather safety problem that the industry had been managing with wasteful engine idling for half a century. That pattern, regulation forcing innovation that turns out to be genuinely better, runs through the entire history of trucking. And it will run through what comes next too. Here's the thing that stops people cold when they first hear it. Ask a driver who regularly sleeps in his cab at minus 30 degrees Celsius. Properly equipped, properly prepared. whether he'd rather be in a hotel. Most of them will say no, and that answer confuses people who have never experienced it. The reason isn't stubbornness. It isn't pride about being tough. It's something much simpler, and it only makes sense once you've actually been in those conditions. At minus 30 degrees Celsius, the world outside a truck goes completely silent. No traffic. No voices through a hotel wall at midnight. No doors slamming down a hallway at 2 in the morning. No stranger's alarm going off through the ceiling. Just the low, steady hum of a parking heater running exactly as it was designed to run, and nothing else for 100 kilometers in every direction. Drivers who sleep in those conditions regularly describe it as some of the deepest, most uninterrupted sleep they've ever had. The kind of silence that genuinely does not exist in any roadside hotel on any highway in the country. The most extreme conditions don't always produce the worst experiences. Sometimes they produce the most memorable ones. So the next time you pass a line of trucks parked in the snow, dark cabs, no movement, engines off, a hotel sign glowing right across the street, you now know what's actually happening inside those cabs. A shoebox-sized heater burning 1/5 of a liter of diesel per hour. 8 batteries keeping the system alive through the night. A $50 curtain cutting heat loss in half. And a driver sleeping better than most people do in a bed they've slept in for years. They didn't stay because they had no choice. They stayed because they know something you didn't. Until now.